My name is Mr. Weed, okay, just like it sounds. Boy, that's an unusual name, huh? Guess what? There are Native American people whose names are Weeden, Weed with an E-N on the end. And sometimes when I say, hi, I'm Dave Weed, they say, oh, you mean Dave Weeden? I said, no, Dave Weed, because I'm not Native American. Do I look like I'm Native American?
Well, anybody
really
could be Native American.
Thank you. You can't really tell by looking at somebody. I work with the members of the Pokanoket tribe. Anybody ever hear of the Pokanoket tribe?
I have.
Okay. Where are they? Where do they live?
In Narragansett.
Here in Rhode Island, and some in Massachusetts. Okay. So when I get together with the Pokanoket tribe, I see all kinds of people. People who look light-skinned like me, and people who look very dark-skinned. Okay. Some people with blonde hair, some people with straight black hair. Okay. So the first thing to realize is that you cannot identify a native person. Okay. You have to ask people, and if somebody says, you know, I'm Native American, then you can usually ask them if it's okay if I ask you some questions. What tribe do you belong to? Where do you live? And can you tell me a little bit about your history? So, the place we're sitting is an ancient burial ground. Okay? Yeah. There were more than likely graves of native people right under where you're sitting. Okay? Can you listen over here? So, how did they get here and why? Why were native people here in the first place? When did native people start living here? 89? That's before you were born, right? So a long time ago. Okay. Yeah. You want to go further back?
Into the 1600s?
Okay, definitely 1600s. Okay?
Thousands and thousands of years ago.
We know that people were buried here in the 1600s, but people were living here 10,000 years ago.
So 500?
Okay, pardon me?
500?
That's a lot more than 500. Okay, 10,000 years is before Rome, you know, the Colosseum and all that. You learned about that. And the pyramids in Egypt, they're about 4,000 to 5,000 years old. These people were here already for 5,000 years. Were they living in villages?
Yeah. No.
Well, what were their villages like? Pardon? Teepees? Yeah, well, something. A hut. We call a wetu, W-E-T-U, and I think there's a picture on there of a wetu. There it is. Okay. And what's different between a wetu and the house that you live in?
One's a lot bigger.
One's a lot bigger. Yeah. What else?
One looks more stable than the other.
One looks more stable.
Yes.
Okay. They were living in wetus. Wetus are these small structures that you can see a picture of on your sheet that were made with saplings of cedar trees and then covered usually with bark or skins. What's the advantage of having a small house like that to live in? Yeah.
So they can keep moving if they need to?
Excellent. Absolutely. They needed to keep moving. They didn't want a big, heavy house that was stuck in the ground. They wanted a house that they could move. Why did they have to move so much?
Because hunting.
Hunting, right, and fishing. Okay. It's nice here today. Can you go fishing and find fish and quahogs down there at the beach?
Yeah.
Yeah. Do you think you could eat them if you needed to?
No.
Sure you could. Yeah, as long as the water's clean, you can eat them and you can eat the fish from them. So on a nice day like this, having fish was a good thing to eat. Okay? What happens in January here?
Snow.
Yeah, snow and ice. And sometimes the river's covered with ice. Can you fish and dig for clams?
No!
Where would you go for food?
I know! supermarket.
Abby, supermarket.
Go to the supermarket.
You go hunting.
5,000 years ago, what supermarkets did we have?
Hunting. Oh, stop and
Thank
shop.
you.
Oh.
Hunting and fishing. You could move inland, okay, into the woods. Who lives in the woods? What animals live in the woods?
Bear,
Bears.
bear, deer, rabbit,
Deer,
squirrel,
rabbit,
chipmunk,
squirrel. Right. All of those.
Bees.
What else?
Did you get attacked by the counselors?
human beasts.
So there are lots of animals that live in the woods here. Do they go to Florida in the wintertime?
Some do.
Birds do. Okay. But the rest of the animals, especially the deer, they're allowed around in the wintertime, in the woods. So you move your Wee-2 into the woods so you can hunt and find the deer. Okay, and they would move to all kinds of places. So that's the way people lived here for thousands of years, moving around and gathering and hunting, getting the food that they were going to eat. All right? So, why do you think people were buried here? Yeah?
Native Americans.
They were Native Americans. They were people who were already living here. We think people in the 1500s, okay, that's going back 400 to 500 years ago, who were living around here. Okay, when people would die, they would bury them the way we do today. But would they bury them in a casket and put a big granite marker in front of them?
No, they wouldn't.
No. What would they do?
Bury them and try to make a place.
Yeah, they would just dig a place, you know, like right here, and dig down maybe a foot or two, because it was hard to dig, and they didn't have steel shovels and tools. And they would bury people here, not in a casket, but usually lying on one side and facing the water, the west over there, to the setting sun, all right? So people would be brought here and buried. Would they put something in the grave?
Yeah, maybe like a knife or like an accessory.
Sure. You've got some pictures here of things that people were buried with, okay? A knife or an accessory. And in fact, a lot of the things that people were buried in around here came from Europe. How did things get here from Europe in the 1500s?
Trading.
Trading, right. So traders would come across the ocean before the pilgrims came here, and they would bring beads and knives and hatchets and some guns sometimes, and bring them over here. And what would they trade for with the native people?
Shells.
The shells, sometimes called wampum?
Yeah.
What? Skins, right.
yeah.
There's a big trade in
Fur.
furs,
Yeah.
okay? So there was a lot of trading that went on back and forth here. And that's how the people who were buried here ended up with plates and dishes, china dishes from Holland, and bottles from England, and knives from Europe, okay? So because those were valuable objects for folks, they were buried with the people who were buried here. 1913, how long ago is that? Is that more than 100 years ago?
Yeah.
Yeah. That's
You
you know when 2013 was, okay? You were around in 2013, right? Yeah, okay. So 100 years before that, a man, Charles Carr, who ran the library here in town, decided that he was going to come over and take the burial items out of the graves along with the skeletons and whatever he could find, and take them and put them in museums. Do you think that was a good idea?
No,
Yes.
not at all.
Not at all. Why not?
Because that's disrespecting people.
There you go. Did people come and dig up your grandparents out of the grave if they're buried? No. You wouldn't like that if somebody stole things from your family graves. Okay, right?
Yeah, I think that he should just let them do.
Just leave them here. Well, in 1913, a century or more ago, that's not how people thought. In fact, they didn't think much of Indians. They thought they were all gone. What does it matter? We'll just take things, okay? So that's what they did. The good thing is that that meant that a lot of things that were buried here did go to museums. Back 20 years ago, some Indian people from the Cape came here and started collecting things from those museums, because we passed a law that said you could take things from museums that were buried with Native people and give them, you have to give them back to the tribe. Okay? So that's what we've been doing for the last 20 years, is giving back burial items that were taken by tribe members. Okay? So, what happened under that stone over there 2 years ago? Anybody know?
Was someone buried?
Somebody's buried there. Who's buried there? Yeah?
There must be someone.
You're a kid too. Why are we sitting here? Someone 18 and up is a
Right.
kid.
The people who were buried here
Actually, no, it's
were gathered by the tribe and brought back here, and they dug a hole.
I think I know who that is.
Yeah,
Might be one of the
right
chiefs.
under that rock there. There was a hole big enough for a big vault made out of concrete. It was 10 feet by 10 feet, the size of a room. Okay, big. All right, and they sunk that into the ground, and they put 650 things that were under the ground in 42 graves here in 1913. They brought them back, put them in that vault, covered it over, sealed the vault so no one could ever open it, and then put dirt on top of it, and then put that monument there. That's what you're looking at, is a monument to the 42 grave sites that were removed here over 100 years ago.
Is it still there?
Is what's still there?
The vault with
The
everything
vault
in it?
is still there and hopefully will always be
So
there.
somebody could just come in the middle of the night and dig it up?
Well, we don't think they're going to do that because it would be very difficult without all those people living along here noticing that.
Yeah.
You would have to have a backhoe and machines and people, and you'd have to dig for a couple of days. And I don't think you could get the vault open anyway, nor could you get it out of there, all right? It's
that must
huge.
be heavy.
It's
What
very
was the vault
heavy.
made out of? Cement?
Concrete, okay?
They would need a lot of
Yeah. So the whole point is to put people back in this native burial ground who have been here for well over 300 years. Yep.
How did they get concrete back then?
Well, the native people didn't have concrete. We put the vault in. We made that was 2 years ago. Okay. Now you got it. Okay.
2 years ago they made that vault?
2 years ago they dug a hole and put the vault in the ground. Okay, but the graves that were dug up were right around here. Okay, and those were only a couple feet under the soil.
So this is the vault.
Oh, that's the vault. There's a picture of the vault right there. Does everybody see that picture? Okay, and there's the backhoe that's digging the hole. Okay, so
That's the hill right there.
pardon me. That's Burr's Hill, right? So you can see all that. If you look up in the middle of the picture, you see a big red stone marker there. See that? Anybody read what that says? Can you read what that says there? Yeah, not that part, but the part on the left. What do you see? Soams. S-O-W-A-M-S. Soams. Anybody ever heard that word? No?
What?
Jesus, stop going.
Yeah, I heard it.
Yeah,
You
you've
know
heard
what?
that. Where have you heard that?
right now.
Yeah, right now. Anybody go to Barrington sometimes?
Yeah.
Yeah. There's Soames Road over there. There's the Soames Elementary School over there. Okay. So you are living in Soames if you live in Warren. All right.
Yeah, it used to be called Soames when Pilgrims.
It was called Soames when the Pilgrims came here, and it means the southern area. It's all the land basically from over in Swansea and Somerset all the way up to Providence. All the land that faces the water down here. And that land was available for people who came here from England to purchase and move into. Was that a good idea?
Yeah,
Okay, why?
because because there wasn't much land that people could populate, so
Right.
maybe some of it could use.
The people who came here from England liked this land because it was wide open. The native people would burn the forests twice a year, spring and fall, and it kept the area wide open. So
Oh my
it looked
God.
more like this, okay, than dense woods. There were woods here, but there was a lot of open land. And just like you were saying, if you, what is open land good for if you come here, would you, pardon me?
Hunting.
Hunting is easier to hunt. If you can see a deer way over there, it's easier to shoot it, right? What else?
Or shoot a
Like
boat.
open land.
Open land. What would you do with open land?
You could build a house.
You could build a house. What else would you do if you came from England? Would you go hunting? Would you
No.
move around to hunt animals? No, you would bring some animals with you. What would you bring? What's that?
Said rabbit.
Rabbits?
Chickens?
What's a little bigger animal that you might bring that you would eat?
Deer.
Well, there are already deer here, yeah?
Bear?
What do you eat when you have a picnic? What do you eat? For meat, huh? What meats do you eat? What?
Chicken.
Chickens. They brought chickens. What else?
Cows?
Cows.
Pig,
And what else?
Pigs.
Pigs. Okay. The people from England brought their farm animals over here, and they could let them graze on the open land that was here. Is that a good idea?
Yep.
Yeah. So, with having this nice open land, what happened to the native people who were living here? Did they get kicked out? You think so?
I
Well,
think they tried to stand the ground.
a couple of things happened. One, they sold off some of the land so the English people could buy it and use it for farms. In fact, Warren at one time was called Brooks Pasture. Okay, it was a big open space like this, and it was used for farmland before we built any houses. That was in the late 1600s. The other thing that happened to the native people who lived here is they got the diseases from people in Europe. What kind of infectious diseases do we hear about today? Pardon
Chicken
me?
pox.
Chicken pox, flu, what else?
Strep throat.
Tuberculosis,
Strep throat.
strep throat. Maybe you don't die from that though, yeah?
Cancer? I got a question.
Okay. What other diseases?
Lyme disease.
No, we didn't know about that then. They might have had it,
Meningitis?
yeah. What else?
Meningitis.
Meningitis.
I'm not sure what you're saying.
Meningitis.
Oh, meningitis? No. Infectious diseases that
Cancer.
spread easily, not cancer, are things like smallpox. Okay, you've heard of that?
Heat stroke.
Pardon me?
Heat stroke.
Not heat stroke, you don't die from that usually. The plague,
People in France.
you hear about that? Okay, these are, and measles.
Tuberculosis.
Measles is a very infectious disease, and a number of people, if you don't have immunity to measles, if you haven't had a vaccination, you can die from that. And a lot of native people here died from a whole slew of illnesses. From before the time the Pilgrims came till 100 years after, they were dying over and over and over again. So by the time most of the land was purchased by the English people, there were very few native people living here. We think only about 3,000. Most of them were living here where it's Warren and Bristol now. Has anybody ever heard of the King Philip War?
Yeah.
Yeah, do they teach that in school?
Yep.
Yeah. That was in 1675. There were so few native people living here, they were afraid they were going to be taken over completely by all the English who had moved in. And they got scared that they were going to lose their whole culture, their way of life. So the Massasoit son, the son of the man who was buried here, decided to start a war. And what he wanted to do was to drive the English back to England. So they started out in the western part of Massachusetts and began burning villages. And in fact, the English people started going back to England. Some of them went down to Newport where they would be safe. Some of them went down to South County with the Narragansetts where they'd be safe. So it looked like it was working. But eventually the English began to go after them, and they ended up killing King Philip in Bristol, and that ended the war about 14 months later. What happened after the war? Were there a lot of native people left around here?
Uh-uh.
No. The ones that were either killed, put into slavery, or driven out of the area. So they were practically, in fact, if you were a native, a Pokanoket native, after the King Philip War, and you started speaking your native language, or even telling somebody that you were a Pokanoket, they could shoot you on sight. Okay, it was that bad. So the native people, it looked like they disappeared, but all they did was go into hiding, move out to other areas, and not occupy this land. So the colonists took over and thought they had all of this to themselves. Well, here we are today. How many native people do you think live around here?
At least 100.
At least 100. Probably 200 to 300.
Oh.
Okay? Quite enough that they get together. They have gatherings, and they were just down at the Mount Hope Farm, right? They do their annual Strawberry Moon Thanksgiving Festival down there. And I was there a few weeks ago, and there were over 300 people there. So the native people still live here today. How do you get to see a native person around here? You ask them? You look for some? We've been doing some programs in schools. Anybody seen the Pokanoket tribe in school? Not yet. But we're going to keep getting them to come and do a program in schools so you can get to meet them and learn about their culture, learn what happened to them, and learn about the things that are most important to them. I've talked for long enough, haven't I? Yeah. Okay. Thank you for paying attention. There's more information there. If you want to go on the internet, I think we have the internet address on here.
Yeah, it's at the bottom.
Soames Heritage Area. Yeah, there's a couple there. I've also got a brochure if you want that. But thank you very much.
Let's go. After this one was Black Prairie Relief Dispatch between Massasoit nations' visions. In 1621, treaty upheld 54 years of peace with early English settlers.
So we had 50 years of peace here because of the great chief. Okay, Massasoit means great chief of the Pokanoket tribe, who is now buried in the vault under our feet here.
He is buried under here?
We believe so. There was no grave marker, but we have some evidence, some physical evidence that it was probably he along with 41 other people.
Those are from